Welcome to Masterclass, everyone. It's YouTube Masterclass, Coursera. As we go through Harvard Film School, small though as we are, we're getting real and legit, and this is a legit film class taught through Harvard, USC, and Calarts. Why all three? Because all three needed to fill for their teacher responsibilities online remotely, or at least so I had it, that they all had an opening as a remote teacher film class, pretty much run the way that I have to run it from Masterclass, which is to be informative, knowledgeable, and share my expertise, which my expertise at this point being this is only the second year of Masterclass. You'll just have to bear with me, although I am an expert on some film studies, and we're going to look at one of them today. That's D.W.Griffith, Auteur, film style. D.W.Griffith, he was basically the first modern American filmmaker to arise as the auteur that taught all the other auteurs how to direct. I mean, we were just talking about how Joseph von Sternberg and Erich von Stroheim were very much into D.W. Griffith's modeling of film. Whether or not their responses would last in the sound era, though we know Joseph von Sternberg very well in the sound era with Scarlet Impress, and Erich von Stroheim with The Merry Widow. That might have been Eric. That might have been Renaud. No, Merry Widow was not von Stroheim. It was von Stromberg. Now we're getting really confused. So we got to look carefully at the Queen Kelly. Queen Kelly being Erich von Stroheim's one of his last movies. And even all the way till then, it's totally like a Griffith movie. And even in Queen Kelly, where there's kind of this class interchange between the lower classes and the upper classes, and how they kind of fuse together when everybody's rich, and then they re-separate when certain ones are poor again. And Orphans in the Storm by D.W. Griffith is kind of the class-setting generation builder of like all of our scopes on what could happen in that sort of beggars of life. We all become homeless and lose our sight, and this is where we are on the road, and we can't escape our destiny, which is our fate, which is because we're women. And in this view, we see Griffith a little interesting, because he's saying that the women are the ones that he wants to make the topic out of in the film, that he wants to make the movies about females, and mainly that's because his main star, Lillian Gish, is a bigger star than he is, and she can keep him on the map. So really, there is a feminist reason for casting females, and that's always the economic, and that is because everyone was interested in what Lillian Gish looked like, was doing, partaking in the Griffith film, etc. So we've got the internet in the background just in case we need to use it, but I don't think we'll need to see it on this picture. The thing is if we look at more films by D.W. Griffith in 1920 and 1921, we'll see that, first of all, Way Down East falls into 1920. And then we get a filmography here at Wikipedia. That's a very good filmography. Some of these, the Britannica is a good one. The TC, let's use the Turner Classic Movies D.W. Griffith one, because this will take us right to an about page, and it says, both the filmmaking pioneer and social provocateur, director D.W. Griffith almost single-handedly developed the techniques by which the films would be made, while simultaneously showing how they could be both a significant commercial and cultural element of American culture for good or ill. Once called the father of film by Lillian Gish and the teacher of us all by Charlie Chaplin. And that goes on. We could read more. That's incredible. This is TCM. Finally, we hear a voice in the fog about clarity in describing this. And we go to the filmography. So now we look at, they've got all the films lined up, and it looks like after some of the shorts we were looking at, the biograph shorts, there's all kinds of them listed here. And even in 1911, there's over 100 films, and this is already after the Tin Pan Alley days, and after when he was a stunt double in certain films, and then he started acting, and then he was directing, and it goes back to these film titles we've seen. And this one doesn't even get past 1911 at first, because you're like, he made like hundreds of films in 1911. But it's strange because I forgot to mention that Judith of Bethulia is factoring 1914 now than 1913, which IMDb showed it at. So let's keep that into consideration, because this one says that Battle at Elderbush Gulch, which is a short film, is his 1913 work. And I'm not sure what the timing on that is. I'm not going to click into it because this is too valuable of a page. But now we're looking at Griffith kind of in a new way this semester, kind of saying, well, we have an even more legit film list, and A Tale of the Wilderness is 1912, and we get to thinking those were all short films. Even The Battle of the Sexes in 1914 was almost put up as a full-length feature, and if I'm correct, there's another Battle of the Sexes that's almost in the sound era, and that's the one that promotes TV. It looks forward to the TV unit, probably because radio was emphasizing the passageway to TV. But that there's two Battle of the Sexes makes not a lot of sense, because the first one is more of a short film about like guy versus chicken, and the new one, it's like the family life has to work out even through adultery being the family. And then there's this movie called The Greatest Thing in Life, and that's the one that I was warning you about, which we're gonna skip because it's also pretty racist. It's where the guy gets hazed. He gets $1 million, he gets hazed, and they put like syrup all over his black face, and it's just stupid. I don't even get it. It's like hazing a black person. Like, why do you want to go see a movie about that? I mean, what are you hazing him for? And why is it even cool to even have $1 million if that's all you can do with it? So I didn't really get that movie. I mean, Fox and His Friends, if you look at the same kind of story as like getting money and then dying, yeah, but Fox knows that's what he's doing. He's like headed for humiliation at the end, but he gets to live up the good life with his $1 million that he won at the lottery for like a couple of years, if even a year, and then he can just go die it off in the street because he spent all the money and that was fun. And that's what a true human should do, is spend all their money until they're dead, you know? He's kind of getting what he wants in Fox and His Friends, although that is a really sad ending, and I'm not being cynical and skeptical about the ending. It's very sad what happens. But that they were ripping him off probably was more reason to why he died. But I'm going to say that Fox and His Friends is more ethical than The Greatest Thing in Life, which is you have the greatest question. And The Greatest Thing in Life, okay, now, here's where you'll have to forgive me. I'm looking at these two monitors. And The Greatest Question is the one where the guy wins the $1 million, right? The Greatest Thing in Life's kind of, and It's a Wonderful Life story, so excuse me, this one's actually a good one. But I don't mean to mix these up, because I am actually following along these trails, and there's two screens, and they're showing me different numbers of where the dates come up, and the dates come up in such a strange way. In this, they're coming up to 1918 on the side, so Judith of Bethulia was a year before Birth of a Nation. The Avenging Conscience, 1914. Home Sweet Home, we know to be a short film. And The Escape, we know to be a short film. And there's other 1913, The Mothering Heart, which is a short film. And then it goes back to Musketeers of Pig Alley, where we have reference. And we have reference, not only to, here we go. We have reference to where we left off after Broken Blossoms, and those Scarlet Days, the one about the girl who's like trying to work as a flower girl, and she falls in love, and she gets mixed up in this sort of Jane Austen-like tale, and everything's up in the air. And then you get Hearts of the World, which we discussed as the one before that, and The Great Love. But the Hearts of the World is the one about World War One, which is a little bit after it had ended, around the year of intolerance, and we did count that one too. So we're all kinds of films in, and we see now that we got to kind of pass by The Greatest Question. The Fall of Babylon was a re-release of the intolerance sequence with the Babylon shots that they put back in order and released as a film. It's very interesting. Shoeheart Susie, We Okayed. Mother-in-the-Law. The Mother-in-the-Law is also a name for intolerance. It's another re-edit of Intolerance, if I'm not mistaken, and another one put forth with the stories, maybe besides the Babylon ones. And who knows why he was splitting those up, although there were political reasons for splitting those up. Mostly it was in his own mind that he had to somehow separate those elements and put them back together and try them again and see if, like any other movie of it, made sense. The Girl Who Stayed at Home. Yeah, since we're getting so much closer back to Way Down East, I'm going to have to click on The Girl Who Stayed at Home and see what the deal is with it. Because this looks like one that I'm not as familiar with. Not available. Premiere information. So, yeah, it's not even available as a film. It's a 60-minute silent film, black and white. So it is a feature we see. But that's one that we're all gonna have to look for on the not the Mother-in-Law. Oh, the Mother-in-Law is the Intolerance picture. Okay, so even I get confused on these very difficult to understand filmographies that are going side to side. Romance of Happy Valley. Girl Who Stayed Home was the one I looked up, and I'm not really sure that I can say much about it, so I'm going to skip that one. And that one is a one that we'll come back to if we find some form of the movie out there on, but it looks like it's unavailable. And then Romance of Happy Valley is an interesting one. It's like the one where the kind of country vagabond types that live on a farm that all get together and have a good time. And it's the exact opposite of Way Down East, where they're all living on a farm and having a good time, and then they find out that the main girl in the film, the Lillian Gish character, is put to the gauntlet like ever. We see that as Griffith's way of knowing that, like, even though they're here to see totally her in the flick, it's his way of taking control and saying, I want to put her in dangerous situations looking like that. Especially now that we've gone through Romance of Happy Valley, where almost only good things happen, like in a Doris Day type cheery movie it is. And then Way Down East has Lillian Gish getting pregnant, and then she is told she has to leave because the guy that supposedly was going to marry her is ashamed that she's pregnant, and the guy that got her pregnant is being dastardly and two-sided and absolutely totally tearing across everyone in general. And so Way Down East is pretty much one of the most depressing of Griffith's career. And we talk about depressing, but really it's melodramatic, and melodramatic comes as the nature of the melodrama. And so we find that these movies, especially what we're going to talk about next, after The Love Flower and The Idle Dancer, we'll get to Orphans of the Storm. And Orphans of the Storm is one where you're sensing the melodrama was put there more to make you even sense the depression of the characters in the film. Like, the characters had to play it as though they were wide-angled depressed, like they were full screen, throttled to the edge of their security. Like in this one, Lillian Gish and her sister Dorothy Gish play these street vagabond girls again that are homeless and orphans, and Orphans of the Storm. That it's in the middle of the war, the French Revolutionary War. It's in the middle of the war, and they're trying to hide out. And it could be the British. Let's see, make sure it's not the British. Nope, it's in France, and of course, and so that her younger sister has not her eyesight is already one of the most chilling parts of the movie, because we're already seeing all these scenes where she's in peril and she can't see, and then they get taken in by this old lady who's like really mean to them, and she like forces them to steal for her and forces them to do all these underground nasty things, and she beats them otherwise if they don't do it, and she's got them kidnapped basically. And one thing that reminds me of this film is the movie Greed by Eric von Stroheim, because there's that whole thing about what happens when you're rich and you can flaunt it, all the way down to when you're poor and you lose it all. But in Orphans of the Storm, they didn't really have much to lose to begin with. They were already poor. In fact, they were already on the street, like trying to avoid like total dismay right as soon as the war tossed them into the streets, and they were pretty much ready for a life of exile by the time they got lost on the streets and couldn't find their way back to where the people that knew who they were could find them, especially because one's leading around a blind one, and neither one of them have anywhere to go besides just hiding from the war in occasion, from hiding from it, and that they dodge this big battle with these terrible collisions constantly happening, where they're always picked up by the victimizer monster lady who takes them back to the underground, like it's even under ground. And you see in Greed how when they lose all their money, they kind of become these more vagrant types, and they kind of become these, what's ultimately going to culminate in Beggars of Life by William Wellman, or already has really. And we see these poor people stuck in these bad situations, and we're rooting for them, because if one good thing happens to them, then it's already turning around their whole character motif, that they're stuck in this character motif that everything bad's going to happen. So if one good thing turns around in a melodrama, suddenly we're all elated that something good happened to this person, that everything bad is. It's a narrative technique of melodrama. You get it so entrenched in the depressing side of thing that if you think the person that was wrongfully accused is given any kind of a break, then suddenly it's like, oh, whoa, what a relief, she was given a break. Not that she's out of slavery or anything, but she's given a break. This is interesting, you know. And I think that plot point is kind of kooky, because it's like, why do you have to have the female that was always victimized to be the one to know that she was going to be, and then suddenly have it be a relief when anything good remotely happens, even though she's got a long way to go? And that's just part of our nature. We see the one that's being wronged, even though we admit in that situation it might have been confusing and hard for those guys to understand. Like in Way Down East, they didn't always know what was going on with her, but they shouldn't have thrown her out just because they thought she was with the guy that she was not supposed to be with, and he was the one that came on to her. And when they find that out, of course, they get rid of him, and who knows whether they get rid of him, but they get rid of him. I mean, he's not allowed any longer, you know what I mean? But we're going to talk today a little more about Orphans of the Storm and Way Down East. I'm looking at this exciting filmography of D.W.Griffith. So it goes Way Down East. The Love Flower we talked about was the one where the dancers, and like The Idle Dancer, which is a different kind of movie, it's more of a traditional quality, and The Love Flower was kind of modern, and it was about these dancers at this retreat that like ends up getting together because they're friends, and it's melodrama, but it's more of one that works out with a happy ending, because they go into the modern world after not being really that modern when they meet. They go into the modern world and they're totally still into each other, so it's kind of a nice melancholy to look at love in the modern era. And then you get The Idle Dancer, which is very traditional quality, and I don't really see it as the most notable of Griffith's films, but it is one where everything goes kind of right again, and it kind of flows. But the technology and the being in the modern world again, that he's reciting so much about the nature versus technology, and the natural world versus the technological world, and how much that's changing, and how ever since the Civil War that's been changing to where the North features the technology of the modern world. As Griffith would try and succor into the South where he left his dad, he would constantly be reminded that the technology ages of the North are exciting him too. Now, Isn't Life Wonderful and the movie Greatest Thing in Life are similar too? And Isn't Life Wonderful is another one of the It's a Wonderful Life, if you can believe it, before Frank Capra did it. But Isn't Life Wonderful is more of the depressing tales of someone who was in the middle of having problems with their job and their bank and everything, like It's a Wonderful Life, and their friends and everything was kind of capsizing. Well, the greatest thing in life was the one where the rich guys are kind of periling, but because they Great McGinty themselves together, they're able to pick it back up. Where Isn't Life Wonderful, they stay homeless, they stay disbanded, they stay rescinded. And Orphans of the Storm is before Isn't Life Wonderful, and that's kind of trailing off into what we're getting to later, because there's more films that I've seen, but we're trying to focus on the main five we're trying to focus on in this class that'll really give you a full credence of D.W.Griffith and his work as The Birth of a Nation. We had to discuss it at the last minute. We're going to have to discuss it again. Intolerance, which we've covered pretty well. Broken Blossoms, which we like a lot and we've covered decently, but there's maybe a few more things about feminism to be said. Like, for instance, in Broken Blossoms, is this putting the girl to the hard knocks and her not surviving it kind of a way to say we're not being feminist because we didn't let the girl escape like we normally do? Because in Broken Blossoms, I have a problem with her dying. That means that the lead chick, the Lillian Gish character, dies off in a movie, and we're so sad that she does, but aren't we using our favorite hero and like in a messiah complex where we've got to crucify her? We've got a Joan of Arc, this chick, just because like her dad's an angry boxer and he's going to kill her for marrying a Japanese chick. And it does side with the female in this movie. You do get the feeling of Broken Blossoms. You do get the feeling that the movie sides with the female and sides that she shouldn't have died. But the fact that she did die makes it a little hard to see the edge on why this is somehow stand up to your fighters movie, because I guess she died nobly. We could say she died nobly because she fought back or something and her boyfriend fought back, but that they were both drenched by the Irish boxer wasn't confusing because that was reality, kind of how the situation would be. But don't you think that could be problematic in a narrative tale, to have her the only one that's being run through the gauntlet in all these movies, especially come to see Orphans of the Storm Way Down East, which is the other two Griffith films to remember? Orphans of the Storm, Way Down East, Birth of a Nation, Broken Blossoms, and Intolerance. If you can name those 5 films and their significance and why they look so good and why they're edited so good and why they're the institutional mode of representation and the standard mode of representation all in one, like Noel Birch was saying, that they're all going to be come down to one big gratuitous film of filmmaking processes, making filmmaking processes like they sometimes do these days, although there are different, more creative choices you could make about filming a process, So, we're nowhere near done, so I want to go into Way Down East a little bit, and I'm looking at this timeline. There's a few we're missing, but Way Down East. Here's 1920s Way Down East. Now, if you look at this picture, it looks almost like Norman Rockwell Dickensian or something, that they revamped it to almost look like this nostalgia piece. And though it is a nostalgia piece in that sense, the true meaning of nostalgia is homesick from the Greek, and I think it means that you're going to get home, you just don't know it's eventually going to be the place that you were going to get to at that moment, but you knew eventually you'd get home. And when you're yearning for home, that's kind of the nostalgia that we're talking about when you see a movie and it yearns for your own kind of family life to get together. Well, let's not hope that some of the things the film shows are like your family life, but let's deal with the closed case of what's going on with Griffith's film language between the time of Intolerance and Broken Blossoms as this kind of less sword and sandal epic and more move to the melodrama. We can definitely see by Broken Blossoms that we're fully in the melodrama form. The female melodrama, the male melodrama, the domestic, family. This becomes Griffith's main genre, and you can even see the Avenging Conscience, the horror film, being part of the melodrama effort that's going on from the beginning of his career, even with A Slave in His Trust. It's a melodrama developing. That Birth of a Nation and Intolerance are like epic war films, are simply because he wanted to get 2 of those in the can, and he knew he'd have to do them first and rigidly and very huge and succumb to the point of having other people tell him what to do on it. He knew that. But with the melodramas, he could kind of sneak into his own. And this seems like more of an epic melodrama, but that's because it's a period piece to not that long ago, in a time and place not far away. And the Way Down East is referring to the South, of course, because the East, way down south, is what you would say. But since they're facing from the Mason-Dixon line to the West, then East, well, they're facing with the West seems to be towards California, and the East is towards the South in the way down factor. So it's factor that you call the South, that it's from a book. You'd be amazed, Broken Blossoms was from a book, and that's why they had the word, one of the words they had in there. It's from a book. We know Birth of a Nation was from The Klansman, and that was not a book, that was a play. But Griffith changed it to like all these Civil War facsimiles, and then it became a Civil War movie, and engrossed in it. And then melodrama does strike intolerance, especially in the last minute rescue scene. And of course, a lot of the melodramas didn't really have last minute rescue scene, except for Great Train Robbery kind of melded that idea that like at the last minute the whole film could just go to end on an exciting note. On a real exciting note, the film just ends, and that's really how all these directors of the early era were going with their total happy endings, but it's achieved only at the happy ending of the person that saves the day, let alone the person that gets saved, and where I'll have just enough time to cheer for them, and then it's over. And that's kind of a last minute rescue and how it goes. Now, one thing I couldn't quite figure out about Way Down East is why they never took the girl's word for it, that she couldn't explain to them why she was pregnant, but like she did want to tell them something that she would be killed for telling them for. And I understand that she was kept down with abuse and that they were pulling her under in this whole way. But I didn't understand how the neglect by her running out at night and her running to the snow was because they told her to leave when she had been exposed by the nice guy and the mean guy, who has been silently not saying he's the mean guy all this time, that he's the guy that is the father of the child. And the guy that wants to be the father of the child is his, not his cousin, but is in the family too, and was wanting to marry her, but now that she's pregnant, the whole thing's blowing up. So you can see melodrama dripping all over this. It's like it's Peyton Place. It's like going to the frickin' novellas, it's like this soap opera almost of a get together. When it comes to Way Down East and let it set in South, just makes it even more like carousing of all the natures, of mankind. Do we really have the one that throws away the woman just because she's pregnant and we don't know who the father is? Is that really? And this is showing us that that's the wrong thing to do. Now here you have an ethic and a moral, okay, in your film. Suddenly, like Broken Blossoms, immoral. She just gets killed. Everybody gets killed. That's horrible. What an immoral movie. Intolerance, immoral, because like all it does is bowl everything over and kill everyone, except for the dude surviving on the last minute rescue. So suddenly these last minute rescues are somehow ethical and moral, saying, and that's how they get the film viewer to really go with it, is because they're saying these last minute rescues are the right thing, they're the good thing, and they're what needed to happen. See, she didn't need to die, and in Birth of a Nation the Klansman had to save the day, and it's like these problems were all fixed. I swear everything fell apart, but they were fixed somehow, basically at the last minute, and that's what we should proceed towards logically in our own life, is the thing that's good, the right thing, do the right thing. And that's what they're saying with these kind of movies, is that like, it's so bad what happened to her, don't let this happen to one of your loved ones, please. And you can get that tone from these films. Don't let them go under. I mean, it is an exciting film, and there are things about it that are really well designed, and that it's happening a lot of time in the snow, and you can kind of see some of the pictures from the movie, and that it's was a play at one time, and a book, and everything that Griffith did would come from plays and books almost, except he would have a lot of them that would be like these sources that were hard to find, and nobody can still find the sound of this silent film by him in the later 20s even. And it's like, we've got this one Dream Street. Well, I'm going to have to go back and watch some of that, because I've seen Dream Street. Now, you're not talking about the one by Bresson. You're talking about not Street of Dreams, but Dream Street. So now we're talking about Griffith in an artistic way, as though he has a canon, as though we can explain why we like One Exciting Night, why we're all leading up to America, in the Revolutionary War, which is a total throwback to Birth of a Nation and all the films that came in between his melodramas back to a war film. The Revolutionary War, can you believe it? We've gone all through these melodramas, and now the best we can do is go back to the Revolutionary War. So, we're getting there, though, because there's also Sally of the Sawdust, which I was wrong about, isn't in 1918, although, was that a remake? We're going to look that up just in a second. Sally of the Sawdust was absolutely not a remake and was not, that I see. Yeah, so that was a mistake that I'm correcting. And it's a good thing we have these classes so we can kind of discover it as we're going. And I know I had to be off book for a lot of these, but this one's impossible to be off book for because there's so many things I'm discovering just from this TCM list of films. And I think I was unfair in picking a wrong list of film credits for D.W.Griffith. Not that the IMDb ones are wrong, because they're right, and I've studied those a lot, but I needed to come back to it because now I'm at the TCM, which I've done film reviews for TCM before. TCM is the ultimate source, and I don't see why I wouldn't have come here at all. But that film that I told you about with not Buster Keaton, but W.C. Fields, and that's Sally of the Sawdust, and it also has other actors in it, and that's the really funny one about the comedy. And so there again, you have this total retreat from melodrama all the way over to the discussion of comedy. And some moments in Way Down East, as horrible as the whole thing goes for Lillian Gish and as it is for us all, there's moments of reprieve. Now, speaking of moments of reprieve, talk about it in Broken Blossoms, or any chance the Japanese guy gets with the young girl played by Lillian Gish. That really gives you that moment of respite that again gets the viewer locked in, because we're like, oh good, something good happened to these like poor destitute people. And that's happening constantly through Orphans of the Storm. These poor destitute people just basically got one break in the whole movie, and suddenly we're all cheering and saying, this is a great movie. This is a great movie technique. Maybe not ranging from vaudeville, although there is the Perils of Pauline, the serial film type thing that arranged there, which is like cliffhanger ending plus she might solve one thing, but it's like a conflict. Each peril is going to nearly like extinguish Pauline. And so you have this idea of like something going right for Pauline at the end, or towards the end, is going to totally get us all into viewing and saying this is a cathartic impression that we're getting from a film where we're like, finally something went right for them. That's like this animus inside of us that feels for someone that's getting the rough treatment. And Griffith knew that format even more so than what was available for him to have learned at vaudeville. I put it that way, because there's more to him just illustrating the capstone of all that is grisly about the Native Americans or African Americans than there is to meet the eye, because he also knows the film techniques, not just the propagandistic ones that he learned from watching, say, Eisenstein and everything. That he learned the propagandistic techniques just for the sake of cinema is kind of more here and Way Down East, because now we see that we have this family and they're all working together, and it's kind of a hard film at first to really get interested in all the characters until you see that there's this pregnancy that's taken place and that everything's gone wrong, and someone is being the Snidely Whiplash who we've seen in the film already who it is. And this comparison to Greed as a movie, as its own kind of paradigm and its own kind of isotope as how other films work. Way Down East came out before Greed, for one thing. And Way Down East had a much bigger scope, only in its plot and direction and production design. How Griffith was able to make these big budget films with big budget scenes, like at the end when the ice flow that I've talked about in this class, the ice flow is going off the waterfall, and Lillian Gish looks like she's trying to get from ice floe to ice floe, trying to get to the one that's getting her to the side of the river so she can get off before she goes over the waterfall. And it's really this stimulating scene. But that Griffith kept lifting his costs just because he had a studio called United Artists, that he was making money through his studio and through the Hollywood classical cinema that he was making money through, that he had established by making studio films, and then the studio would pay him back, and then he'd pay back the studio, and vice versa. They just keep paying each other back, and that's how it kind of gets with the filmmaking process these days too. Sometimes it's a buy-in, you buy the studio in, sometimes the studio buys you in, sometimes it's a mutual buy-in, you know, but you really got to have the money for one film. And then if that one if that one makes all its money back, you still don't have the next movie's money unless there's sort of a studio system. It's like, okay, we'll reward you by trusting you with this much because that's how much you made your last movie with, and that's what we can trust you with. And so you can see in every case, like D.W.Griffith, even in the way he makes Broken Blossoms, like kind of a smaller tale, into this whole epic, like pure, you're at the pier, you're seeing all these things that are Asian, and you're seeing all this life that's different than your own, and you're seeing like this place where this drunk Irishman feels outcast, probably even where he lives, but he does fight back if anything goes wrong. But like the problem is he is the problem when it comes to the relationship she's having with the Japanese guy. And who knows what kind of relationship they were in and how deep they were in it and what that was even trying to symbolize by now, except for there is a romantic characteristic that they have interest in each other. And here it goes back to that whole argument that he's putting something nice to happen for them, even though we know that they're the victims, they're the ones that are going to get written off as the dead ones, whatever. They're dead meat, you know. And yet we're so positive. This is so cool that they get to have this romance one last time. It's still going to live on with me forever. Like, it really does, too, because of the way it's painted. See, because you have them totally in a lack, like in Greed, on the one hand, where they're stuck in the desert, after they've had everything, pie in the sky, Fox and his friends, all the money you want to do with for a few years, you know. So Griffith really narrates that whole idea of giving someone a positive view only when annihilated by all of the things that are giving it a nearly nihilistic view or non-existent view of what pertains to that character. So, now that we've looked at Way Down East in that way, we also see it as a theater-type play. The way that he plays it in the house is kind of interesting because it's the one where almost everything takes place in one location. Again, Broken Blossoms is kind of like that. Not Intolerance, not Birth of a Nation. They're all in different locations, the north, the south, Babylon, you know, France, all these things. And then we got Orphans of the Storm, and it's in France, and it's during the French Revolution, which makes me wonder if the Intolerance one was related to this same French Revolution or if they were different parts of the war. That kind of makes me also wonder if Intolerance wasn't also being British in saying who was the leaders of that time, and that it was a period piece, and that all you would have to do is change the title cards to say what was going on at the time in history. That it was changed, I don't know. That Intolerance was released in different parts, I'm pretty sure. That this film, almost in one house at the same time, is kind of notable to Griffith, because even in Orphans of the Storm, it's a small house, but it's a wide berth of ground you can cover out there, and in this, we're all bounced in by the snow. We're boxed in. I mean, even asking for someone to go out in the snow would be like really asking for them to just go into extinction. And it's a cold part of the world, man. At least in this film, which is taking place in the winter on top of everything else. And it is the winter of D.W. Griffith's discontent because he still hasn't made any money back, really, and his career is guaranteed because he's a studio man, and he makes just enough to almost break even, and then gets a little bit from the studio. He's a lucky director, you know, that's what the Directors Guild was made for. But, I understand the Directors Guild and how it works. I even have a place in the Directors Guild. Can you believe it? I direct movies, too. And my films are insignificant in this class, other than in the Directors Guild, which was started by D.W.Griffith. You make negotiations with the terms that you think are good for your rewards, pat on the back as a filmmaker, so that you can see that you're achieving fruits from advancing the art of filmmaking. And I think that Griffith was really into that idea in all that he made, and you can see that with Way Down East, how it's in one place and like a play, and you can see how he's trying to high art everything in the film, that he's always trying to bring film to its high art, is because he's trying to bring it up to an art form, so that he can show that the editing techniques he uses, even though are seem like an erasure of editing and we can't see it, it's invisible, even though he still wants to pump the production design up to such a height that film is an art form with its montage and with its mise-en-scène. And that is what cinema is a gradual conflagration of mise-en-scène and montage. However you're going to put it, you could put a bunch of montage at once, a bunch of mise-en-scène at once, long take, montage, short, choppy takes. But Griffith was the one that was bringing it up to an art form more than any other director. Maybe Hitchcock later brought it up to an art form even more, and Stanley Kubrick did even more. But let's just say that D.W. Griffith, with his movies like Way Down East and Orphans of the Stormed, Broken Blossoms, Intolerance, and Birth of a Nation, brought the American film to an art form. That it is an art form now is because of him, and it's because he was so engaged in technically creating it just like he would, like his audience would want it, and he would want it, but solving the most perspective theory of relativity, and that is how future generations would still love it, would still argue over it, would still protect it, would still reinvent it, would still reanimate it with their archiving procedure. And so we all know that, and now we all know that D.W. Griffith was the one, besides even Porter. He may not have had the first American film. His first full feature, we're saying, is Judith of Bethulia. We could be wrong. There's a couple other 1914ers that I haven't seen. But what we do know is the fact that we're talking about it as a subject here so far down the trail, and we still have more than halfway to go in this class. I mean, where you're thinking, what more is it going to talk about? But there's a lot more. But we're going to come back to this point over and over about how he is the father of film, in the respect that he's the classic version of who built the American film industry from the waist up, and who is the one who embellished the work in front of him, in front of the camera, into this great artistic medium that we have now. Not just stylistically, but aesthetically. And aesthetically in the sense that he invents film aesthetics, and that's why film as an art form is where it is. And we'll have to discuss more about the nature of film aesthetics, because the nature of film aesthetics is that there's kind of signs and signifiers in these structural pieces of representation of these shots that are built up into scenes that are built up into sequences. And that's what's gathering all the pieces of a film of a sequence. And that's where it's all in one kind of place at one time, although it could be montage, parallel editing, parallel syntams. So you see these syntams that build up the sign and signifier, which seems like a textbook way to describe a filmmaking process, but it's what the film is showing us, is what the film was directed to see at that moment. And that's kind of it, like, ill way to say it, but what you're seeing is what they wanted you to see at this time in the film, that they put that on there. And Griffith invented all that. He's like, this is the time of the film we need the last minute rescue. That might be a Porter technique, but this time is the time we need the sequence that develops the love story in the middle. So we've got the whole second act bleeding about how they're going to get into this. So I'll wrap things up here, folks, because we're getting pretty studious of time, and I feel like I've driven the points home enough about Way Down East, except for that to film something like in one time, in one space, takes a lot of understanding of how to point the camera in new kind of ways to see the angle of the shot, and the angle of the shot comes together when you angle it so that no two angles are really the same. That's when you've really featured the theater on film to do it cinematically what's in theatrically done. And so, before I leave today, because I have a few more minutes, 3 or 4 more minutes, and Orphans of the Storm, you can see on the box that it even says Dorothy Gish. Now, Dorothy Gish wasn't as famous as Lillian Gish, and she was actually talked into doing the movies by Griffith, by Lillian Gish, and that was because Lillian Gish really wanted her to play parts that she could see what her parts were like, and then her part was even harder than hers, even though she hadn't been as famous, so it was kind of a nuisance for Lillian Gish, or it was kind of a conspiracy or something that they were trying to get Dorothy Gish to play the harder part, and her sister Lillian Gish is the one that has to show her around, and really it could have gone the other way on that. I'm not saying it didn't, but the point is that somehow it was Griffith that was being controversial again, and that is by giving the hardest part of the blind girl to Dorothy Gish when he was only supposing that Lillian Gish would bring her in. That they were somewhat in love with Lillian Gish, and D.W.Griffith were somewhat in love does not detain me to think that Dorothy Gish really stayed away, but did, from D.W.Griffith, and everyone did, because Lillian Gish was the most powerful player on the set, and really what she said goes. So I'm wondering if Broken Blossoms didn't end that way because she wanted it that way, like her to actually die in the film, just to test that out, you know? And that Lillian Gish was the one that was really the control behind these movies in so many ways, especially the top 5 I've named, is because she had such a big hand in getting it made, because she was where most of the money was drawn from, because she was a big movie star, and she was a big movie star because of D.W. Griffith's directing, but that she was more higher paid than he was, and a bigger actress in society is true, and that's why these films were kind of controversial, where Dorothy Gish plays the harder to play role, because they said in the end they didn't really know which role was harder and whether or not that was the reason to cast the film that way anyway. So while you're all hanging out, just realize there's no midterm except seeing the class next week, and I'm sure you'll all be back because there's plenty of more where that came from. I mean, there's still stylistic things to take into account for about Griffith. There's still, what is this great a film aesthetic that he's invented that now we said he's invented? I got to break that up into little parts and explain that more, because there's so much more, like the enriching of a film image that you can do just by basically watching Way Down East and seeing how they enriched these nostalgic images. And nostalgic images always should be enriched. And for now, that's YouTube Masterclass. We'll be back in a few days, hopefully 3 to 5 days. Hopefully it wasn't too long of a wait last time. There's a lot to prepare. I'm glad we found this TCM filmography, because we'd have never gotten anywhere without it. Thank you, TCM, for putting up the accurate one, They're all accurate, but this is the really down to the fine-tooth comb way it's got to be. Plus, it's all put out of sequence, so I love that. All right. Thank you, TCM, and we'll see you next time on Masterclass. All right. Bye.